Hi and welcome to this rather late winter update. I've been putting it off really. I've been doing many other things lately, but I've certainly been enjoying riding in this post-COVID environment. You know, whether we get COVID back next winter or not, I don't know, but we had a pretty easy winter here in that most people I know had triple or 4 vaccinations, and I actually got COVID myself, but I had really no symptoms. The only reason I knew I had COVID was because my son had symptoms, and I did a quick test and I discovered that yes, I had to isolate for a week too. But apart from that, I had no real reaction. Anyway, we'll move on to something a little bit more light-hearted, and I'll just give you an update of what's happening in the garage. We'll start with the Moto Guzzi Le Mans, since I'm standing right in front of it. I've written a few notes just to refresh my memory, but in reality I've done nothing to this bike except ride it, and really it's now that I've got the valve guides done and everything else on the bike pretty much up to scratch. I mean, it's not a beauty queen, it's never going to win a Concours event, but it's a really competent and reliable riding bike now, and it actually still looks pretty good. From 10 feet away it looks magnificent. Up close you do see signs of age, but that patina doesn't worry me. I really find that it sort of adds to the pleasure. I can see little marks and things that I've done to it over the years, plus you can see a lot of the heritage of the previous owners, and I think there are about 4 previous owners. I think I'm the 5th owner from looking at the registration history. So all I've done to this bike, I gave it an oil change, including filter, probably about 6 months ago I think it was. And the only other thing that I've done to it since then really is ride it. So there's really nothing to do on this bike going forward except enjoy it for the next few years. I've got to get a new left-hand front indicator mount for it. I've got the wrong one on there at the moment because the original rubber one actually perished. And finally some reproduction ones have become available, so I'm going to order one of those in the near future. I might do a short little video on that, comparing the quality of it to the one on the right hand side, which is an original factory one, just to perhaps let you know what they're like, and you know, whether they're a worthwhile purchase. I have had some issues with some of the rear rubber mounts for the indicators on this bike. The ones I've got are aftermarket pattern reproductions, and I do find that the rubber that they're made out of is actually fairly brittle, and you've got to be careful walking past the bike that you don't knock the indicator, because they're actually quite easy to snap. So we'll move on to the Gilera. Now, I haven't been riding that as much as I would like, and one of the reasons is it's actually fairly uncomfortable, and I find since I bought it, I'm now a few years older, and I really can't bend into that sporting crouch the way I could even just a few years ago. So I'm not quite sure where that will be in a few years' time, whether I'll hang on to it. I'm loath to part with it because it's such a pretty motorcycle, and when you actually do get into the corners, it really is a fantastic motorcycle to ride quick through corners. There's nothing like a small, lightweight motorcycle, even with moderate power, to have a lot of fun on. It sort of really follows the Lotus philosophy, which I can't quite remember at the moment. I think it's something like innovate and then add lightness. I'm not quite sure whether that's quite correct, but certainly the add lightness is the Lotus philosophy of sports cars. Things that I've done to it: I fitted some new front brake pads. I did a short video on that within the past year, and I also replaced the oil sight glass, which is on the left-hand side of the crankcase, because it was cracked and was weeping some oil. I do have a minor oil leak on that bike. Now I've replaced that sight glass, which was weeping a bit of oil, and I've also replaced the countershaft sprocket seal. Again, that was also leaking a bit of oil, but there still seems to be a leak somewhere, and after a ride I get a couple of drops of oil on the ground. And I'm not sure, but I think it's obviously coming from one of the crankcase gaskets, and really the only solution to that is to take the engine out and perhaps replace those gaskets. But it's really not a major problem, and I'm loath to disassemble the engine for such a minor leak. If it gets any worse, I will probably have to do that. But as I said, I'm not quite sure of whether I'm going to continue with that motorcycle or not. I might start looking around for something that's a little less extreme in its riding position. But then again, I really do like it as a motorcycle. It's a beautiful little thing to ride. Moving on to the TNT. Now, I've done a bit of work to that over the last year during our various lockdowns. I put a new front tyre on it. It was a Michelin Power, and I've certainly been impressed with that. The rear tyre is nearing replacement too, and I'm looking at probably putting a Michelin Power on the rear as well. The other servicing I've done on that bike is I did an oil change, and I also replaced the steering head bearings, and I found that the original ball bearings were quite dry. I replaced it with a tapered roller conversion kit. And the main reason for that was that I had a shudder in the front end under braking at low speed. And I also discovered that the right-hand front disc was out of true slightly, by about 5 thou from memory, I think it was. In the end, I managed to minimise the shudder dramatically. It's barely noticeable now, and it doesn't always seem to occur. So I'm not quite sure what the issue is, but at the moment it's not annoying me, so I'm just living with that little minor problem. A bit of an update on the hydraulic clutch conversion that I did on that bike just over a year ago. I'm very pleased with that. It certainly has transformed the riding experience. I didn't realise how much a heavy clutch lever is such a detriment to your enjoyment of a motorcycle. Now, I've also angled the bars up a little bit to get the lever placed in just the right angle for me. One of the issues of doing a hydraulic conversion on the Benelli was that the actual switch gear doesn't make allowances for a hydraulic clutch, so that you find you can't move the lever up or down to get the right angle. There's a very limited range of places where you can actually place it. So I angled the bars a little bit more dirt-like in that the ends of the bars tip up a little bit more. And I've actually found it a very comfortable riding position. It also moves my weight slightly further forward, not much, but it's certainly the combination of everything has transformed my riding experience. Okay, but I think that covers it for the Benelli TNT. Let's move on to my wife's Breva. Now, over the past year, I've done a few things to that bike. I did the starter relay fix, and I've also fitted new tyres front and back. This time I went for Bridgestones, and I had to fit a new front disc because the one that was on it was worn out. So that is the second replacement disc, so we're onto our third disc now. It certainly seems to go through front discs fairly rapidly. But then again, it's got very good brakes. It's only on one disc, so I guess you've got twice the wear on one disc as opposed to with a twin disc setup where you're sharing that load. And I also changed the battery, and I did a service on that bike as well in the past year. But the interesting news is that we've actually replaced that bike. We haven't decided what to do with that Breva yet. It's still in the shed. I've just done a service on it, and I've been actually riding it myself around, and it still rides really well. I'm actually quite surprised at how well that bike has served us. Apart from replacing tyres, brake pads and front discs, and I've replaced the rear disc, I've done very little work to that bike. It's still on its original clutch. There's been no real issues apart from the oil consumption increasing over the years. We're not quite sure of the actual mileage of the bike now because, as many of you know, the odometers on these early ones tops out at 9999 and it doesn't clock over. It's an electronic odometer. But we believe it's done somewhere between 140 and 150,000 kilometres. And in reality, it's probably been the perfect commuter. There's no chain to worry about. It really doesn't need much looking after. It just soldiers on week after week when my wife rides it into town to work. So you ask yourself, what could I possibly replace that, what I've considered a perfect commuter with? Well, we went through a bit of soul searching on what we would like, and one of the candidates that we were looking at was an electric motorcycle. But the issue is, there really isn't much choice in Australia for electric motorcycles. Under the previous government, with their sort of climate denial politics, there was really no incentives to actually buy an electric vehicle of any kind. The only subsidies we got in Australia were state-based, and none of those subsidies really covered motorcycles to any degree. So you ask yourself, after that long preamble, what did we buy? Well, we ended up buying another Brevva. I received a phone call one day from our local motorcycle dealer, A1 Motorcycles, said that they had a low mileage Brevva on the floor that had just been traded in on a bigger 1100 Brevva. So I shot down there for a look, took it for a ride, and yeah, I was quite impressed. It's really clean. It actually looks like a brand new motorcycle. It certainly doesn't look like a motorcycle that's as old as it is, because it's a 2008 model. Ours is a 2004. So it's still 14 years old, but it actually does present really well, and it rides well. Though the interesting thing is, when I compare it to our old Brevva, they both ride pretty much the same. The only real difference that I've noticed is that the gear change lever on the old Brevva is probably a lot sloppier because the linkages have worn, and the clutch pull is a little bit heavier, but that's probably because the cable on our Brevva is a little bit tired after all these years. Yes, it's still on its original cable too, after all that mileage. And my wife's been very happy with it so far, though she's actually loath to take it out in the rain. Surprising enough, she's taken the train on a few days rather than get it dirty, something that she wouldn't have bothered with the old bike. Now I'm wondering whether we should keep the old one as a rain bike, but yeah, interesting, how a new looking motorcycle changes your perspective and how you look after something. Now the only thing I've got to do to the new bike, I've taken the sump extension off the old one, and I'll be fitting that to the new one at its next service. And the other thing I need to fit some heated hand grips to the new one. I'll probably do a comparison video between the two shortly, sometime in the next few weeks. So if you're interested in how a low mileage Brevva stacks up to a high mileage Brevva, it might be worth a look. But that really covers all the bikes in the shed. I'm trying to think of what else I've done. Now I've put some new shelving in the shed just to organise everything a little bit better. Last time I bought this tool chest, and that's really made my life a lot easier working on bikes. And the shelving, which is on the other side of the camera at the moment, I'll put up a shot of that, where I've organised all the power tools and oils and nuts and bolts and things. Has certainly taken a lot of clutter off the shed, and it makes the garage a much more pleasant place to work when you have to. Oh, and one other thing, now that I've just thought of it, is that I got a replacement motor for my lathe, because I think I mentioned in the last video that swarf had gotten into the electric motor on my lathe and had shorted it out with a lot of smoke. I went through 2 motors to get one which was suitable. The first one actually vibrated too much, so I returned that. And the second one, which I got from a different supplier, works really well. I did have to relocate the starting and run capacitors on that, because the original motor had the capacitor was a much smaller bulge on the side of the motor, so it wasn't interfering with the belt. But with the new motor, with the 2 capacitors, it was actually in the way, so I had to remotely mount those. Well, I think that's about it for this particular video. Long-winded though this video may have been, I hope you enjoyed some of the news, and if you've got any suggestions of what you'd like to see in the coming months. I'm hoping to do some more motorcycle review videos now that COVID is sort of out of the way and we're getting into the warmer months. I certainly should have access to a few motorcycles. And yes, I'm still planning on doing that a 750 Brevia throttle body balance video. Yes, I know I promised it last year. I had a look at the video and saw I promised it, and I still haven't done it, but I'll do it on the new bike, so at least have something clean. I won't have to give it such a good scrubbing so that you can actually see what I'm doing. Well, that's it, and I'll catch you next time.